Well, once again, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Tom Florian. I am with the Iowa Girls High School Athletic Union and Iowa High School Speech Association. Here is serving as your moderator and host today on behalf of the Executive Director, Craig Enan. We'd like to welcome you to today's session of our webinar series for the IHSSA Coaches Convention. We're thrilled to be able to bring this to you in a virtual format this year and appreciate your interest in being with us here this afternoon for today's session as well as the sessions later on this fall. A couple of ground rules to kind of go over before we begin. You'll notice that the chat function has been disabled for today's webinar, but we encourage you to utilize the Q&A function both via Zoom, the Zoom webinar, as well as the interactive piece that our first presenter will discuss, which is PairDeck. If you're not familiar with PairDeck, Jacki will be able to go into that in more detail, but that'll be an interactive piece for you in the first half of today's presentation. So we do encourage you to utilize those two options when interacting with today's webinar. There's also the raise hand feature. If you need clarification on anything, please feel free to raise your hand. We'll do our best to call on you and provide you the opportunity to ask for clarification. But those are the two ways to interact in today's webinar, through the Q&A function in Zoom as well as PairDeck, and the raise hand function as well. So before we get started, wanted to say thank you again for being with us, and it is now my privilege to introduce our first presenter for today's webinar this afternoon. It is the head speech coach at Waukee High School, Mrs. Jacki Pleggenkuhle.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, everybody. I am also your 2020 convention chair, and when we are so disappointed that we are postponing this year's convention to next year in our regular format, I'm speaking on behalf of the entire committee and telling you we are so excited about this virtual session series that we have coming up. So thanks for being here today. I have been delegated or relegated to teaching the online session, and oh my goodness, I'm sure that none of us are experts in this, but I will take one for the team and tell you what I know, and hoping that people join me in this interactive session. If you could right now open a new Chrome tab, Chrome window, and in the URL bar, type in joinpd.com. Joinpd.com in your URL. It will ask you for a code, and you can see the code in the upper right-hand corner. It's UBPAFW. I'm going to give you some time to sign on. We've got a lot of participants so far, so that's awesome. I'm going to start moving along. First of all, I want us to think about what was your experience teaching online last year. In term 4, I know everyone had a little bit of a different situation, and I want you to just respond with what was your situation like last spring. We had some asynchronous, no, we had enrichment, pass, fail. I know we all ate Cheerios and walked the dog. We all had a little bit of different everything. And what's your experience right now? I've been talking to some friends all across the state, and I know some of us are teaching online fully. I know some are teaching in a classroom with fly on the wall, owl cam students who are participating from home. And some of us are teaching in person with the fear that we will be all online at some point. So I just wonder, look at all these different ways we're teaching. My experience currently is teaching 2 sections in person and 1 section fully online. So I'm going to kind of walk you through, because we're all kind of doing it differently, I'm going to not play expert in any of these different methods, but tell you a little bit about mine and what I'm doing and what tools I'm using and how I'm surviving. When I look back at last spring, I'm reminded of living on the farm again. And when I lived on a farm, we fed our cats in this old skillet out by the barn, and we dumped all the food in, and maybe it's for 2 or 3 days. In my metaphor, it's for a week-long time. And last spring, Waukee High School was full-on instruction, full-on grading, but it was in an asynchronous way. So we had to dump all the food in the bowl for the entire week, and that was the learning, and that was the assessing, and everything went into the bowl, and then the kiddies came and ate. And I had all new students in one of my courses, and it was kind of a mess. This is what my bowl looked like in term 4. We had to put in weekly modules, and I was so diligent. I had a video announcement every day or every week, a to-do list, some stuff to do. All their instruction was there, and I waited Oh, wow, there were lots of videos. And how many ugly selfies did we take of ourselves? Oh my goodness, we had to get over how we looked on camera all the time. I think I was modeling imperfection for my students. And I had some students who came and they ate voraciously. They wanted the connection and they wanted the learning. They wanted some purpose in their lives. And those were some of my students. And then I had some students that, you know, slept all day and played Fortnite all night, and they whispered their speeches in the darkness at 2 o'clock in the morning, and it creeped me out. And so I had those kind of students as well. And then the hardest population of students to get to were these students ahead, the hiders. We didn't know where they were. And so I'm thinking, when I found out in August, a week before school started, that I was going to be teaching an online session, I was like, what do I do? How do I do this better? Because it was not okay to just kind of put the cat food out last year, and I know I had to do it better. So I went to 3 sources, and these are kind of what's going to drive my session with you today. The first thing I did was I read a book called Learner-Centered Innovation. It's a good read, just about making students their own pilots in this thing we call learning. I read a book called UDL, Universal Design for Learning, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit of depth today, but it's maybe something that we might need to delve into a little bit more later. And I took a 1-week online asynchronous session from the Global Online Academy, and I highly recommend this, and I'll put links later in my session if anyone's interested. They have these free and some are at cost, but it kind of teaches you how to teach online, and I certainly needed that, so I did that. The themes they all had in common were student interest and engagement, student empowerment, and student creativity. So that is what's driving everything I do in my classroom right now. And so I want to kind of break those themes down into 4 things to do. Those are kind of nebulous ideas. So what 4 things can we do as instructors? 1 is design for student agency. I'm trying to design for connections and building relationships, designing for assessment, of course, that's what we do, and designing for navigation and wayfinding. That's what the Global Online Academy called it. So I want to ask you to define first student agency, this idea of student agency. What does it mean to you? Make that interactive, show some responses. And then we wait for internet speeds to catch up. Taking responsibility and ownership, students doing it. Students have the tools they need to work with. Take their own learning into their own hands. That's exactly how I see it. I see it as autonomous and students' control of their learning environment and of their learning processes. And that's really hard to do because I didn't really learn that in teacher school, but now we're trying to do that. So here's how I'm trying to design for some student agency. I'm trying to give students control of their pace to some extent, both asynchronously and synchronously. I have to meet with my students every day at 2 o'clock, and I have until 3:10 with them. But I've learned from feedback from them that they like to interact and then go away and do some work and then pop back in and interact some more. So there's been some asynchronous and some synchronous learning. I'm trying to give target deadlines, target zones, knowing that students are busy and I don't know what they're dealing with in their daily lives. I'm utilizing more universal design. I'll talk about that in a second. And I'm trying to increase student voice with interactive discussions and using surveys and student feedback to really shape what I do. So this is so interactive, and it's not what students want. Students, I think they're watching TV sometimes, but I'm always trying to like make them interact. So I think I keep asking myself as the teacher, what do you need, students? What do you need? And one thing we did at the beginning was through Flipgrid. I let students set the tone for what their ideal classroom would look like. And I think that was really important in giving students that voice because I needed to showcase different learning styles. I needed them to be able to communicate their needs. And also this came about with a lot of like shared fears. And so it was great for students to see other students fearing getting on camera, fearing giving speeches. And I think that common fear stuff really helped. The other thing that I'm doing for student agency is offering choice in how to spend our class time. And I'm showing you a document that I created. It says collaborative break rooms at the top. And for this one particular day, I let students choose who to work with and what they were working on. So if they were just getting started in this one assignment, the communication model analysis, they could go interact with these people here, and here are the directions. And if you want to work on this other thing, because you're farther along, did I do it right? You go here to this chat room. And then there were actually 2 other breakout rooms, and it was for speech writing. So students get to decide what they need today, and that drives where they go and who they interact with. And so this has been something that has really worked for student agency. I want to kind of show you what I mean by this universal design for learning. This is something that was kind of new to me. I took a class on it this summer with the same name. And I want to show you this unit. I'm so geeked up about it. And I'm willing to share this and get feedback from you if you're interested. So this document, okay, I'm not a document creator. I don't have all the bells and whistles, but I did add some color. Basically what universal design for learning is it's a kind of a differentiation tool, but instead of differentiating for levels of learning, it's differentiating by students' choice. And so you take this big idea, and right here I have it in this box. The DMAT course competency for my speech course is to analyze how communication functions in relationships. So as a standard, it's super broad, and students could do so much to answer that question. So I created an essential question: how does communication function in relationships? And whatever they did to show that they learned something, they had to answer that question. So first I convinced them why they cared. They're in lots of relationships. And I gave them a series of research questions to try to get them interested, to generate some interest in learning this stuff. And then they got to choose how they wanted to learn it. And so this right here is links of bits of food, little chapter sections that they could read. I also scoured the internet and YouTube for all these different videos that taught them what I needed them to learn. And I created a PowerPoint lecture. And down here in this other section, I just found resources, this love language quiz, and I created some podcasts, 2 to 3 minutes long. Basically, I was reading the textbook to them, but they could walk their dog and listen to my podcast. So they get to choose what they're learning, because they're in different relationships. They get to choose how they're learning it, and then they even got to choose how they were going to express their learning. And this was so much fun to look at, so much fun to grade, so much fun to see what students come up with. The idea with UDL is that students might not all have strength in writing or strength in presenting. Maybe they're great graphic designers. Maybe they're video creators. And so I made students choose from the column the knowledge-based project ideas and the application-based. They had to do one of each. And so some of them were creating magazine layouts, and some of them were creating interview documentaries about family relationships, and they were interviewing their family and editing them all together. And it was wildly fun. I loved every minute of watching it, and students, for the most part, did too. I'm going to move back to my presentation session, and I'm going to kind of skip along. I'm not going to show the rubric because I don't want you to bounce around. But what I want to say about the rubric is it was really liberating. The rubric basically said, did students apply, and did they show knowledge? And was it professional looking? And that was it. So it was a really easy thing to grade because they're really just showing if they understand how communication functions in relationships. Now, the kids who loved this, and it was most of the kids who loved it, were the ones who wanted to show off their art and their graphics, and they were bored and they were dying for something to do. The only students who I got negative feedback from were the box checkers. Those students who just are like, can I just do a worksheet? And I will say that some of the options did work for those students because there were some really low energy, easy assignments for them to do. They could do a Flipgrid extemporaneous speech explaining, they could explain different levels of friendship they've had or different stages in a relationship. Or some of them responded with just the essay choice, which is what I had done in a prior semester. I had everyone write an essay. And so some of them just went back to that because they thought it was easy. They could kick out an easy essay in a timed writing format in 30 or 45 minutes. So even the kids who thought, I don't want to actually go learn this stuff, they did okay. I know this seems like a big deal, and it did take me about a week to put together that relationship UDL assignment, but I want to invite you to start simply. I just UDL-defied an assignment yesterday, and it took me about 3 minutes with one tweak in Canvas. So an assignment that I'm asking students to do related to conflict management this week is to They have to read a segment of a chapter, and I linked it there. And then I originally wanted them to write a paragraph on one of these 3 prompts. They get to choose which prompt interests them. And then I decided at the last minute, or maybe they just want to give a speech. Some students are worried about giving speeches. They need more practice. Some of them would rather give a response orally than writing a paragraph. So this is a way that students get to choose how to learn it and how they're going to express. So that's pretty much all I want to say about UDL, but it's something I'm really geeking right now, and I invite you all to explore that further if it's not something that you have looked at before. I'm going to show some responses. We've got one person who can, oh, yes, Romeo and Juliet. So many options. I love that. There's so many things to do. I feel like this could take a while if I let people be creative here, but I kind of want to see what you come up with. Yes, these are all great. Narrative essays, you could do video narratives. Yes, excellent. So another thing that I've been trying to work on is designing for connection. And I want students to first see me as an online presence and then also communicate with each other in an online community. I'm finding, and maybe this is true of students that you're working with, I'm finding that students are very isolated. And the students I'm working with online don't leave the house, and they're still hanging out in the dark and hiding behind the bushes. So I'm doing whatever I can to connect with them. I was first stressed out this summer by seeing everyone's fancy Bitmoji classroom things where you can just click, and I'm so envious of you if this is you. But really, I stopped beating myself up, and I created an online presence that kind of shows a little bit about me. And I think that's all we have to do, guys. We just have to show a little bit about ourselves. If you go to my Meet the Teacher tab, you see a picture of my dog, and you get to know a little bit about me. And I think that's important. I also think that we need to keep creating videos and letting students see and hear from us. They don't want to read. They don't want to read directions. They want to be told directions. So the more we can do videos, this video I had used in the spring has students listening to my video explanation of that UDL assignment, that relationship assignment, and then they had to think about ideas and questions and respond in a private little Flipgrid back and forth. So they could post it at 1 o'clock in the morning, I could listen to it the next day, and I could respond, and we could almost have a back and forth conversation. But it's building community and it's looking present. The other thing I do, I mentioned before, I use breakout rooms a lot. I've heard people use the Google Meet breakouts. There's an extension. And last week I heard from some of my staff members here that I PLC with that you have to go in and open all the different doors. And so that's kind of a headache. I use the calendar Meet, like I'm setting up a Google Meet, and then I post those codes in different links, like right here. And this is the one, we're working on a project right now on group problem solving. And so students have a little bit of, I don't know, expectations and behavior, cameras on, this is our classroom. And then they go to the chat room and work together. And I'll tell you what, this is scary for me because I can't be in all the chat rooms at once. And I'm afraid someone's gonna, walk across the room naked or something, like we've heard these horror stories. But students love it and it feels normal to them. I've also find that students are more accountable because it's harder to disappear in a small group than it is disappearing from my whole group my whole group Zoom meeting. So this has been really popular. Another thing, I'm asking you right now, what's your favorite interactive tool? Let's share now. I have a bunch, and I'm gonna give you a link that we can all share our resources on later on at the end of my presentation. I've created a shared document that all of you will have access to, and we can load up our responses. Right now we have a few responses. Oh, kids love Kahoot! And Flipgrid is mine. PairDeck I love. PairDeck is my favorite right now. I don't know. It doesn't look great right now because I'm not giving you time to really do it well. But one thing I love about PairDeck is it prints a report for students and they get that in their email. So they get my interactive lecture and their answers along the side. And also I can go in and I can have a little chat with them inside PairDeck. And so I feel like it's another way that students are seen. I'm using PairDeck also in my classroom with my live one-on-one, it's our first year one-to-one technology at Waukee, we're finally catching up. And I'll use it in here because it's a great way to have a discussion where everyone throws their ideas out just like this. And it's a really low-key way to get everyone involved. It's not hard It's all anonymous. You can see that you can't tell who's saying what, but I sure can on the back end of things on the dashboard. So that's a nice way to keep students accountable. Here are some creative ways I've connected with students. I'm watching my time, Tom. I'm 21 minutes in. I love taking roll call attendance in different ways, like our favorite ice cream flavors, or hey, what do you need today? Anything from like back rub, or I need help on number 7. One day we opened with stage fright symptoms. So like, okay, everybody sees that this is a normal thing. Shout outs, emails, surveys. I like to keep it creative. The last thing I want to talk about is designing for navigation. And I'm only going to talk about this for like 2 minutes maybe. Everything I read is when kids are taking online classes, they have to find out easily where to find information. I took my whole master's degree online, so I totally could associate with like, oh my gosh, where do I find things, especially in technology. So I think the biggest piece of advice that I'm trying to follow for myself is to create labels in Canvas or labels in Google Classroom, and then use that repetition of labels over and over again so students always know what they're looking for and know where to find it. So for example, in my Google Classroom, I always started with a video announcement, then came the to-do list, then a revised calendar. And if I break in and dig a little deeper, looking at that speech samples page, if you dig in, all the speech samples were on that page, or all the learning materials were on that page. Everything used for instruction, because students don't want to have to like rifle through all the pieces of instruction. They want to go there and find all the instruction. That's what I've learned from them. Using Canvas now as a first timer, I'm not sure about this. It's all new to me, but like I've been cleaning it up and unpublishing all the stuff that kids don't need to see and keeping this language always the same. Every week, schedule and navigation. Here's what we're doing this week. Here's all the stuff you need. And then here's the learning. Dig in, interact with it. There's lots of links and attachments there. And every time they have to turn something in, I yell at them, turn in this thing. And so I'm trying to create repetition and patterns of communicating in this code that they know what to do. So like this is an example of the schedule and navigation page. Everything they need for today in our class is just linked there. And students have been so good at being, linkers for me. Oh, I forgot I was going to talk about one more thing, Tom. And this is designing for assessment. And I'm going to kind of end there. You can kind of just see, I know my peers are killing themselves trying to grade everything. And I think we all as educators need to keep things simple. Keep it student-centered. I'm trying to only grade the stuff that I'm looking at for assessment and just give feedback and responding in really creative ways to the stuff that students are doing for feedback and for formative assessments. I kind of want to know what favorite assessment forms you're using. As you type your response, I will share that my favorite assessment tools right now are Google Forms and creating surveys from Google Forms because I learned so much from that. And then also Flipgrid because students can respond to that so easily. I use Google Forms as exit tickets, quizzes, yes, Schoology, discussion. Ooh, I want to know about Go Formative. So whoever put Go Formative there needs to put that in the shared resource chat document here in a minute. Google Assignments, external tools, forms, another PairDeck lever. We need our vegetables, our pears. I think the most important thing for all of us to remember right now is that we have to give grace. A friend of mine reminded me of this, and I want to remind you all that we need to give students grace and we need to give ourselves grace because this is hard. And we're all first-year teachers, again, doing something new. I created a tool for us to share. It's a Google spreadsheet. You all have access to it. Right now, you can hover over the QR code and go right to the document, or you can copy and paste that tiny URL. And I want this to be a place that we can drop some shared resources. In the document, it shows, the title, the link to learning more, and kind of why you use it. I also think it might be valuable to put our email connections there too, because I know if I have a question about someone who's using a resource, I want to be able to know who put that there. And I might say, hey, DeVore's, how are you using this tool? Or hey, Kevin, tell me how you do this thing. So I thought that we could all kind of become a larger speech PLC statewide. Tom, what do you have? Oh, what questions do you have? I have a PairDeck response. If you want to type a question in your PairDeck right now, we can go there and I'll show those in a minute. And also, Tom, have you seen any questions pop up right now that you want to start with?
Yeah, on the Zoom side of things, Jackie, no, thank you for an awesome presentation. That was so informative. You've covered so much, honestly, and it was so well done. So thank you for your work on that. We had a comment come through the Q&A on Zoom that another platform that's being used is iMovie and Canvas as well. So that was shared in the Q&A. But aside from that, we don't have any other Q&As in the Zoom format. I see you have some coming in here on PairDeck, so I'll let you answer those.
Okay, great. Thank you. I see one question is, how do I handle students being embarrassed about other students seeing their Flipgrid response? You can shut the feature off. So sometimes like when I did that example earlier when it was just like, hey, students, I'm going to teach you this thing. Now tell me what you think about it. I can set that feature in Flipgrid so only I see it, and then I can just respond back and forth to the students. But what I love about Flipgrid is students are able to watch each other's speeches just like we do in classroom. We always, in live classroom setting, students giving a speech and then I'm over there afterwards writing on the rubric, and my students are all having a conversation responding to the speaker. They talk about, the effectiveness of their hook, or they ask questions or talk about how they were personally affected by the speech. Flipgrid does that too, and students are loving that. And I love it too because it takes me forever now to listen to 34 Flipgrid speeches on my own time. I'm so behind. I'm trying to create the content and I can't hardly score the content fast enough, but they're getting immediate feedback from their peers and they like that. But you can shut the feature off so only I see it and students don't have to see it from each other. The other thing I love about Flipgrid, but it's a danger for the perfectionists, is they're able to re-record. When you're in my room and you screw up, you drop your note card or you say the wrong thing, you just have to plow on and you just hope for the best. And I think some students, and I know I was this way, video recording all this stuff, I'm a perfectionist. I'm like, oh, I forgot to say that thing. And then I start over and I start over and I start over. And I think students are doing that too. So I think as much as we can model the real, genuine, oops, you just move on. An All-State critic said one time, things are going to happen in your performance. And the performer just deals with it in lifetime. You just go on. And you don't react to the oops in the middle of your performance. But yes, you can turn it off. New teacher advice entering the world of virtual learning. Oh, my advice to you, be patient with yourself and reach out to others. I think what I saw in the crisis COVID teaching term 4 was the connections being built between teachers on our staff and also teachers across the state. I know I was communicating with some of you. What are you doing? Help me. How can I do this? How are you surviving? And I think those connections were so helpful. In my little speech PLC, several of us teach speech 1, and teachers were teaching for each other and then sharing. One person does this lecture and then everyone shares it. And I think some of the learning management systems like Schoology and Canvas are making those really shareable. So I say reach out. I'm willing to share my resources with you. Anyone who wants that relationship communication document, you can take it, copy it, do whatever you want with it. I'll put the link to it in that shared resources, and then do whatever you want. And then also give me feedback because I want to know how it works for you and what I could change. Because it was just, on a whim, I was like, oh, I'm going to try this thing because that's what we're doing right now. We're reinventing wheels. Any other questions?
Yeah, Jackie, we had one come in, and then I'll yield the floor to you to transition to our next half-hour presentation. But the last question here that I'm going to pose to you was, the comment was, there are lots of students that might be reluctant or unable to show their faces on camera, and often it might be the entire class. Aside from utilizing polls or just asking if they are there any fun resources to check engagement during class? What recommendations might you have?
Well, the PairDeck requires 100% engagement all the time. There is a free version of that too. So I'd say look into PairDeck. In our school, we have an expectation school-wide that if you are teaching online, we have to take attendance and see students' faces. And so that's been like our mental health check-in. And I see that students are struggling. And I think that it is a huge, not coincidence, there's a huge correlation between students who suffer from anxiety and who are taking school online, at least from where I'm sitting with my group of 34. So we have to check in and see faces. What I'm trying to encourage students to do is be their best. We're showing up at class. put clothes on, wear lipstick if that's what you do. And I'm also trying to encourage them to have a really plain wall so their socioeconomics is not shown and we're not distracted. I'm sorry, this is a really distracting background, but this is my world right now. But I'm thinking that that's been helping. I've also been sharing like resources with them, like how to like up your game online, how to like be more camera friendly. So I'll add that resource in the chat too. But I'm going to stop talking right now so I can introduce Matt and Debbie DeVore. They are our next presenters in our first annual virtual Coaches Convention. They have been so many years dedicated to the IHSSA. Debbie has served on judge certification committees and has been an IE All-State Chair. Matt has been a district officer for several years, and he has served on the convention committee. Together, they've hosted contests, and Craig is like, there are people. They do everything. Last year, they were the first ever husband and wife team to receive the honor of Outstanding Educators from the National Federation of High Schools. So I introduce to you Matt and Debbie DeVore, teaching us about directing plays virtually.
Thank you very much, Jackie. All right, so I guess we're gonna get things started. Matt really became my sounding board last year because I do play, and my assistant is actually an aide down at the elementary school. But because we obviously had to be apart, yeah, Matt definitely heard a lot of what happened. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this up here. So it truly was, in my mind, a journey that I took last year, one I never expected that I would take. So we were so excited at the beginning of March because we were going to do The Lost Boy. And my assistant loved Peter Pan. I'm going to be honest, I loved Peter Pan. And it was just this beautiful story of being able to see the fictional side of how J.M. Barrie created Peter Pan. And so we kind of went with the saying, all the world is made of faith and trust and pixie dust. And you know, that truly did continue on until, you know, mid-March. It was Sunday, March 15th. That's when everything really changed. The kids were excited to do our first read-through on March 16th. But of course, that did not end up happening. Because everything was just so crazy, it was finally March 25th where we were like, we're gonna do a read-through. This is gonna happen. We're positive it's gonna happen. It has to happen. And the kids were excited because so many of them at this point thought, oh, well, track. I can't do anything for track. Track is out. I can't do anything with golf. But we're trying to give them just like a little carrot to grab a hold of. So they were excited. We had parents who were very excited that we were trying to do this. And so then we continued on, right? And there was a point where I just kept thinking, is it going to end? And there were times during COVID where I thought, oh, I am flying, I'm doing great. And then pretty soon I was like, ooh, nope, I'm just running. And then I was like, ooh, I think I'm walking. And I'm gonna be honest, by the end, I was crawling. And it was at that time where I was crawling, I realized I need to have a plan B because I really didn't foresee my kids being on stage presenting to an audience. And with that plan B, I'm going to be honest, it came from stage partners. You know, during that quarantining time, stage partners sent out a lot of stuff. And this was one of the pieces that they put out there that people could read. And they actually even made a comment, you do whatever you want to with it. I think one of the things that I loved about Stranded Views from Quarantine was the fact that it was a play of monologues. So, here we had The Lost Boy, where everybody had these characters and they all interacted. But of course, that also meant that I had kids who didn't have speaking parts. I had kids who, if they did have speaking parts, it might only be 1 line or 2 lines. And I'm going to be honest, as I read through this, I loved the fact that anybody who was going to be involved in this, they were going to have, they were really going to have a character, and they were going to have to memorize things. In some of my students, I'm going to be honest, they chose not to participate. Part of it was they just worried about the time issue. For some students, they wanted to focus on work, or they wanted to focus on other things. I went to Stage Partners, and I actually emailed them many questions, and they told me that you can use whatever monologues you wanted from Stranded Views from Quarantine, which was really nice. They also made a comment about if you wanted to create your own, you could create your own. You could put it on YouTube. And I'm going to be honest, another thing that was really nice was the fact that it cost me nothing. Like I said, I love the fact that it was free, because I'd already spent money on the scripts for The Lost Boy. And granted, they are now in my library and I can come back to it at any point. But it was a little unnerving. We really do count on having an audience to help make sure that we get by. So being free, that was nice. It was a nice little thing. So the principal and superintendent love the idea of us doing this virtual practice, and then us putting our play essentially on YouTube. So my assistant and I decided that we needed to figure out how we were going to do this. We utilized Zoom, and we had 18 or 19 students, and we decided that we were going to split them up into groups, because otherwise we just feared that they weren't going to get enough of that individual attention. So we had 3 to 4 students per group, and each group practiced twice a week, 1 hour each time. So they spent 2 hours with us. Each student went through, they practiced with us. We gave comments, their peers gave comments, and then there were times where we would say, now we want you to go back and we want you to practice this chunk again, but we want you to make some of those changes that we discussed. So it was a totally different approach to some of the things that we normally would do, but it was also exciting to be able to see their faces. I would say one of the most frustrating parts of that was just the fact that each student's internet was so different. So there would be these times where I would have a student and they would start and then they would freeze. And so for 30 seconds or a minute, that's all we saw. So we lost that whole chunk of their monologue. So that was my biggest frustration in terms of those practices. Otherwise, it was really nice to be able to have that communication with those kids.
If I jump in here, because like I said, I listened to all this stuff going on in the house. And so I saw it from the other side. But I think one of the things that amazed me was the connection. Even though they weren't face-to-face, there was still a great connection between the directors and the actors. And she mentioned it before, but watching those students who, if they would have done the stage production Lost Boy, there would have been some students who would have had some extremely minor roles that wouldn't have been extremely involved. And now they're thrust into that spotlight, and it really gave, them, but me too, an opportunity to really see what you can do when you are given that one-on-one time with them and watch them shine and blossom in a way that you might not have seen, in a regular production. And that was really, really cool.
So then in terms of our performance, The students individually recorded, and then they sent it to me, and I'm the one who put everything together on iMovie, and then eventually uploaded it into YouTube. That too was quite the undertaking, because each student, sometimes they had different computers. So sometimes getting things transferred into iMovie was a little tricky. I think there were a few times where I think I walked away. I'm pretty sure that Matt saw me a little angry.
There was some frustration. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, I love technology when it works, but then when I don't know how to handle it, that's when it gets a little scary for all of us. All right, so then hopefully you guys see the next little chunk here. So these are things that we talk to our students about. So the very first thing that we kept talking to them about was the frame. So in terms of the frame, the first part that we discussed was set. So we wanted them, kind of like Jacki was talking about earlier, we wanted to make sure that it was distraction-free, and they were on a ship. So essentially they were in these different parts of a ship, and I love the fact that the kids got super creative. So, you know, we had things like we had the portholes. We had kids who really did look like they were outside on a deck. And it was creative. Now, my students didn't use green screen, but I could see people using green screen very easily here, because really you're just creating an illusion of a place. So set is important. And then, of course, that movement. So we know that kids have to stay in that frame. They have to stay in the camera. But with that movement, you know, yes, I know that it's getting up and moving, but also when do we need to get closer to that camera? And when should we start to pull away? Those were good things for kids to think about. The staying in frame sometimes was hard, because they would want to get up and they'd realize, oh, but I'm too close, and my head is cut off. So it really was kind of this learning and growing experience for all of us. All right, and then there are, of course, some more things that we had to think about with our students. First of all, lighting. My assistant, she really is, she knows how to do everything. I love her to death. She is a photographer. She is an artist. She did all sorts of painting for a while. So in terms of lighting, she definitely was the person who really helped drive the kids in terms of what kind of lighting is going to be right for me. What time of day should I really should I record my video? So lighting is something that's important, just like on stage. It's just a little bit different. I think it's important that kids start to think about costumes. What are they going to wear? And they also had to think about props. So our students, we actually asked them to show us those things. We, of course, gave ideas. Their peers gave ideas, and then they raided closets within their house. And it was really fun to watch them be creative in a totally different way. You know, it wasn't like I'm gonna go raid my little closet down in the auditorium. They had to raid their own closet. So it was fun. Of course, you then need to think in terms of what platform am I going to use to put all of this together. For me, I chose iMovie, but I know some people chose to do stuff with Zoom. And I'm sure that there are great people out there who would be able to help with that. I have not used that. So I don't know for sure how to go about that, but I know that there's a lot of tutorials online if that's something that you're looking to do. And then of course there's the extras, not that we necessarily used a lot of these, but you could do special effects, you could use animations. Of course there's always B-roll, music. And then if you're going to use those things, don't forget about your copyright. That's always an important thing to think about. And I know Craig would say the same thing.
While she's transitioning, I just want to say that there may or may not have been a couple of times where we may have snuck into the school
Oh,
grabbed a couple of props, sanitized them, stuck them in a bag,
and put them in
mailboxes. Put them in
mailboxes.
mailboxes, or threw them in a bag and threw them on doorsteps, rang the doorbell and ran.
We were really good at ringing the doorbell and running.
Yeah, whatever it takes to make it work. Whatever it takes.
So this is actually, hopefully you can see, these are little pictures of all of my kids. So I asked them to find a pose. Like, where do you feel in your short, or your little short monologue, where do you feel like is the most exciting pose that you have? And so everybody had somebody take a picture, and they sent that to me, because we're really big on trying to make sure that we have those posters, that people can see them of our shows. And then we have put them in our green room afterwards. So these are the kiddos who took the journey with me. And it really was a great group to work with. And then Matt and I kind of scoured the internet and found some different websites. So these are websites that have tips for virtual performances. We also have here companies, especially if you're trying to find a show for a virtual performance. All of these places have them. You can take a look at them. Of course, I have time for questions. I know there's more than enough time for questions here. And then I also have our email addresses here if for some reason you need to contact and ask some additional questions. So
thank you, Debbie and Matt. Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead, Matt.
I was just going to say that, when you're looking at, you have the virtual play, and then I know some people are contemplating like streaming and live streaming and things like that. And that's a different ballgame in itself. I know that Dubuque Senior just did a streamed event this weekend. They had a wonderful performance of
the Curious Incident
of the dog in the nighttime. Yes, and it was great. We watched that, streamed that virtually, and it was wonderful. And Aaron Dean and his crew did a great job. And they said that Aaron said, if you have any questions about the streaming aspect or what they've been going through their journey, he would be glad to answer any questions there for you as well. So I'm just going to give you a quick shout out. If you know that's something you may be doing, you can either look up Aaron's email address on the Dubuque Senior website, or it is adean@dbqschools.org. I didn't have time to get that in the slideshow. adean@dbqschools.org. He's a wonderful resource as well for that component.
Well, thank you both so much for sharing your experience here with us and providing a great presentation, a lot of great information. During your presentation, we did have a question come in regard to how students submitted their recordings to you. Did they utilize a Google Drive? What worked best? What are some recommendations?
Some students did send it to me in Google Drive. Some put it in an email and sent it. So then, it still went into my drive because they were so big. Actually, I think that's what everybody did.
You did have some issues. What was the issue?
I had a young lady who had a really old Mac, that's what she used. And it didn't show up as an MP4. It showed up as, something else. I had to do some research because in my mind, I was truly thinking there's got to be some way to fix this. And it took me a while, but I figured it out. I'm going to be honest. I think Google Drive is a great tool to utilize. It's easy just to put it in there, and then you can download it to put it in iMovie.
And folks, feel free to submit any other questions here. I just want to remind everyone that we have recorded today's presentation, so you'll be able to go back and review it at your convenience, at your leisure. Also want to mention that I believe both Jacki and Matt and Debbie will have agreed to provide their slide decks to us to post on the IHSSA website. They're nodding in agreement. I'm glad I'm not mistaken on that. So we will be able to share those with you as well. But please feel free. We have a few minutes here. I want to make sure that folks have enough time here to submit any additional questions. We did have one come in. How did you address ticket sales and revenue generation?
We didn't have any ticket sales for our show last year. We just put it on YouTube. It was available for everybody to see. Our school they really do a nice job about trying to promote things. So we also had it listed on our school Facebook site. It was on our school website. And then people just kept pushing it out and pushing it out. But yeah, that one, we did not make any money. And I guess I didn't feel bad because it didn't cost me anything. I know we're always looking for ways to make money to keep afloat. But it was one of those years where I've said, it is what it is.
And I want to say, yes, we want to fund our programs, but we did have a discussion when all of this started hitting, and we started getting nervous about how are we going to make this happen. And it boiled down to the fact, and it still boils down to this fact this year, we want the kids to have the opportunities to perform. And maybe it's not on a stage, maybe it is, who knows what's going to happen this year. We're trying. But do something to give those kids the opportunity, even if it means no revenue coming in for your program. That won't last forever, okay? But try to be as creative as you possibly can. It's not easy. It's not always fun. We found that out. But when you do try something different, then these unexpected joys pop up. And they're the things that you wouldn't have expected to kind of just drop in your lap, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, if I hadn't done it this way, I never would have seen this or found out about this. And those are the things that you really just need to grab a hold of and embrace. And those kids, as long as you're giving them a platform and some way to perform, they really, truly appreciate that. They crave that. They need that.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, that's definitely an important message, to provide the opportunity for the students to have the activity and then the performance. So always a great message to remind ourselves of. In your opinions, what has been the best option from a virtual show standpoint, utilizing the Zoom Live function, live streaming it from a staged performance, or pre-recording everything in advance and then putting it all together?
Well, it's kind of one of the things we're dealing with right now. I know we switched our musical and our play this year. We typically do a musical in the fall, but with the singing, we were really worried because of, they were talking about, at one time, I know it was like 25 feet, they wanted people to stay away when you're singing. And so we thought moving that to the spring would at least give us maybe possibly an opportunity to do that. So we moved the play to the fall. And so they are currently in rehearsals, in person, on stage. They wear masks during rehearsals, and everything else is business as usual. Of course, sanitizing as much as possible, social distancing as much as possible. And so we are trying to decide what route we're going to take as far as, are we going to limit the number of people we have in the audience? And it depends on the show you do. Can we record something and then stream it through their company, or does it have to be live streamed? And so those are things that you need to check with the company first to see what options are even available to you, and then make sure that you get in contact with your administrators as soon as possible. And so our decisions right now are, we're just trying to decide which route to go and what would be, the best for us and the safest for everyone. You have to also look at cost. That's a big deal. And equipment, if you're going to live stream, you got to have some sort of equipment that's going to, be able to handle recording and, shipping that out. And the companies will help you with that. I know, especially with the musicals, MTI, I know it's a cost, but some of those companies have, they'll send you the equipment, to do the recording and set everything up and all that as well. But every company's a little bit different. So just, start your research early on that. We don't know what route we're exactly taking right now. We know that we'd like to have some people in the audience. And I think for us, we're probably maybe leaning towards a recording and then streaming it in some capacity is what we're looking at.
We just have a couple minutes left here in today's webinar, and we do have an attendee that has raised their hand. Liesel Rorda, I'm going to give you the ability to unmute yourself and ask a question or ask for clarification. Go ahead. All right,
you might have the mute on, Liesel.
Sorry, accidentally hit the raise hand.
Oh, no worries. No worries.
Well, it's good to hear your voice.
We did have a couple other questions come in here, and then I want to be respectful of everyone's time. In reflection, what is one aspect you would definitely not repeat, and what is the number one thing you would definitely do again?
I think that I would beg the administration to record the students myself. I know that even though we went through things with the students in terms of how things should be recorded, sometimes they didn't end up happening that way. So I just think that would kind of eliminate some of those headaches. I'm going to be honest, I really did love the practice time with the students. And Matt's right, there were a lot of times where I would make comments about those students who typically don't have very big parts in terms of the plays. I would say, oh, I was so proud of this student today. I wish you would have been able to see the facial expressions that this student had. They've never shown those before. So it really was one of those moments where with that small group, beautiful things really did happen. And I really am proud of my students and what they accomplished with this show, even with the little headaches. And that connection, being able to have that connection, even though it was not completely face-to-face, it was nice to have.
And looking ahead to the musical for me, when everything eventually does go back to normal, there are a lot of times at a musical practice where I don't have time to get to that individual, one-on-one time with just the actor and the director. I'm even thinking about, once things are even back to normal, hey, why don't I just schedule some Zoom time with you individually, and I can go through that and we can talk about that with nobody else around and really focus on that. That was one thing that came out of what she did that I thought, man, that's something I can utilize, and I think it would pay huge dividends for us in the long run.
All right, this will be the final question that I'll pose to our panelists this afternoon before we wrap up. Will you be performing with your students wearing masks as well?
As of right now, no. We had good discussion in terms of the administration. And my principal has made the comment that since the volleyball players are still really close to one another, they're not wearing them. Our football players aren't wearing them. Our basketball players aren't wearing them. He said he totally feels like we too should be able to have the right to not wear masks. Right now we are wearing them, trying to mitigate anything that we possibly can, just trying to keep each other safe. That's always our goal.
Well, thank you all so much for a wonderful afternoon here for our first Coaches Convention session of the fall, given virtually today. I want to thank all of our panelists, Jacki, Pleggenkuhle, Matt and Debbie DeVore. Thank you three so much for sharing your time, your wisdom, your experience with us today. Everyone who's attended today, thank you for spending an hour of your time with us this afternoon. As I mentioned, this has been recorded. We'll be sure to share it on the IHSSA website. Thank you again for all that you do for students in Iowa, in speech, in drama, and debate. And with that, I'll close for this evening, and we look forward to seeing you at our next session in a couple weeks.